Hey everyone, and welcome. Are you ready for this? We are diving deep into the 2024 U.S. presidential election.
Big one this year.
Oh, yeah. And trust me, this isn't just any election. Wild Wolf 3310, the online commentator who inspired this deep dive.
I do, yeah.
They put it perfectly to take this. The stakes, they couldn't be higher. We're talking about completely different visions for America's future.
Totally.
Reignited debates on everything, healthcare, climate change.
Yeah, everything's on the table.
And we might even see some historic firsts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This situation is like nothing we've seen before.
Right.
A sitting VP, Kamala Harris, going head-to-head with a former president trying to get back in the White House. Donald Trump. It's practically unheard of in modern American politics.
It's going to be wild. So, historically speaking, this election's already won for the books.
For sure.
Just think, if Harris wins, she'll shatter that ultimate glass ceiling,
First female president.
Exactly. Talk about a legacy.
And then on the other side, there's Trump. His influence on the Republican Party, it's undeniable. Yeah. Whether you love him or hate him, he's still got this fiercely loyal base of supporters who just connect with his America First agenda.
Yeah. It's a powerful message. So it really begs the question, what does America want to be?
That's the core of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like we're choosing between two totally different paths for the country.
Exactly. And to even begin to understand those paths, we need to understand the players.
Let's do it. First up, Kamala Harris. She's already broken so many barriers in her career. Former prosecutor senator from California.
Trailblazer for sure.
And of course, the first female Black and South Asian vice president.
Talk about shattering glass ceilings. And one policy proposal that really stands out is her plan to expand the earned income tax credit.
Oh, yeah. I remember Wild Wolf 3310 talking about that.
It's a program to help low to moderate income working families, and her expansion could potentially lift millions of Americans out of poverty.
So it's really about tackling economic inequality.
Exactly. It's a concrete example of her commitment to building a more inclusive economy. It's not just a slogan. She's got real policy ideas behind it. All right. Now, for Donald Trump, businessman turned politician, served as president from 2017 to 2021.
Definitely a presidency that's going to be debated for years to come.
For sure. So one of the hallmarks of his approach is deregulation.
He's a big believer in that. He sees it as absolutely key to unleashing economic growth.
For example?
Well, during his first term, he rolled back a bunch of environmental regulations, argued they were just too burdensome for businesses and were actually hindering job creation this time around. We can expect more of the same, reducing what he sees as government overreach.
So sticking with that less government, more freedom philosophy that really resonated with voters back in 2016.
Oh, yeah. It's a direct contrast to Harris's focus on government programs and social safety nets.
You can say that again.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got these two powerhouse figures, totally different backgrounds, philosophies. Where it gets really interesting is when we start looking at the issues they're battling it out over.
This is where we really see those contrasting visions for America.
And Wild Wolf 3310 was really adamant that we understand these issues because they're going to directly impact all of us.
Absolutely. They affect our lives.
So let's dive in. First up, the economy. Seems like that's always at the forefront of American politics.
Always a top concern, yeah. And this election, no different.
What are some of Harris's key economic proposals? We touched on the earned income tax credit, but what else is she pushing for?
She's really big on investing in infrastructure, particularly green energy projects.
Okay.
Her argument, it'll create jobs, reduce carbon emissions, and make the U.S. the leader in the global clean energy economy. Think of it as a modern-day New Deal, but with a sustainability focus.
So not just creating jobs, but creating the right kind of jobs for the future.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, how does Trump's economic plan compare? He's all about those tax cuts and deregulation, right?
Those are cornerstones of his economic philosophy.
Yeah.
He argues that reducing taxes and regulations stimulates business growth, creates jobs, ultimately benefits everyone. He loves to point to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017.
That's the one that lowered the corporate tax rate.
Big time. He claims that move made American businesses more competitive globally, led to more investment and job creation. But, of course, critics say that the benefits mostly went to corporations and the wealthy and didn't really do much to help income inequality.
A classic debate about whose interests are actually being served by economic policy. It's fascinating how these two candidates represent such different sides of that age-old argument.
It really is. And it's important to remember that these economic debates have real-world consequences for people.
It affects their lives.
Impacts everything. Job security, wages to the cost of groceries. Theory's not just some abstract theory. It's about how we all experience the economy day to day.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's easy to get lost in all the political jargon, but at the end of the day, it's about how these policies actually affect people.
Speaking of issues with real-world impact, let's talk healthcare.
Another one of those hot-button issues. Always. So let's break it down. Where does Harris stand on healthcare? I know Wild Wolf 3310 mentioned Medicare for all, but to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
So Medicare for All is basically a proposal for a single-payer healthcare system. The government would provide health insurance to every citizen. Everyone. It would replace the current system of private insurance with a government-run program.
So it's like how Medicare works for seniors now, but for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. People who support it argue that it would simplify the system, reduce those crazy administrative costs, and make sure that everyone has access to affordable health care, no matter if they have a job or pre-existing conditions.
That sounds pretty good, especially if you've ever had to deal with the nightmare of private insurance.
Right. But, of course, there are critics.
I bet.
They say a system like that would be way too expensive, could lead to higher taxes or cuts to other government programs. They also worry about long wait times for treatments and less choice for patients.
A complex issue, for sure. Valid arguments on both sides.
For sure.
Where does Trump stand on all this? I know he's not a fan of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
He's been a vocal critic of the ACA, argues that it's too bureaucratic and expensive. He prefers a more market-based approach.
More free market.
Yeah. Private insurance companies competing for customers, driving costs down, improving the quality of care.
So less government involvement, more free market.
No.
It's consistent with his economic policies, too.
100%. He also supports allowing those insurance companies to sell plans across state lines. Says it would increase competition, lower premiums.
Two very different approaches to healthcare. It's fascinating how their ideologies play out in such specific policy proposals.
It's a great example of how this election isn't just about personalities. It's about fundamentally different visions for how American society should work.
It's about choosing the path we want to take as a country. And speaking of paths, there's one issue where the difference between them is maybe the most obvious: climate change.
Yeah, their ideologies are fundamentally at odds on that one.
So let's break it down. Where does Harris stand on climate action? Wild Wolf 3310 mentioned she's a big advocate for tackling the issue.
She's been very clear about her commitment to addressing climate change.
Good.
Supports rejoining the Paris Agreement, that international agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
The one Trump pulled us out of.
Yep. She sees it as a crucial step in re-engaging with the world on climate action.
And what about domestically? What's she proposing to do here in the U.S. to reduce emissions?
Big on investing in renewable energy. Solar wind power. She's also proposed stricter regulations on fossil fuel companies and investments in energy efficiency and clean transportation.
Sounds like a pretty aggressive move away from fossil fuels.
It would be a major shift. And it's facing pushback from the fossil fuel industry and those who really prioritize energy independence based on our own oil and gas.
Which brings us to Trump's view on climate change. Wild Wolf 3310 mentioned he's more focused on America First energy policies.
He's definitely been skeptical of the science of climate change. Often downplays how urgent it is to address it. Sees environmental regulations as a burden on businesses and a threat to American jobs.
And a big supporter of the fossil fuel industry.
Absolutely. He talks a lot about the benefits of American energy independence based on oil and gas production. Sees it as key to economic growth and national security.
A very different perspective from Harris, who sees climate action as an environmental and an economic necessity. Amazing how this one issue shows so many of the fundamental differences between these candidates.
It really does. It's a perfect example of the bigger ideological battle we're seeing in this election. Government intervention versus free markets. Environmental protection versus economic growth. Global cooperation versus national sovereignty.
It's a lot. And we haven't even gotten to immigration, another area where they have totally different views. We're going to take a quick break, though, but stick with us. We'll be right back to explore more of these key issues shaping this pivotal election.
Can't wait.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be a fascinating deep dive.
It really is.
We're back. Two candidates, two very different paths for America.
And it's not just about what they believe.
No, it's about how they sell it.
Right. How do they get the rest of us on board? So let's dig into their campaign strategies.
Okay. Let's talk tactics.
The nuts and bolts of how they're trying to win this thing.
With Kamala Harris, it's all about building a broad coalition. Minorities, women, younger voters.
Yeah, those groups that traditionally lean Democrat.
Exactly. but each with their own specific concerns.
So she's got to energize the base while also appealing to those moderates, those swing voters.
Tough balancing act.
Yeah.
One key element for her is her personal story.
Makes sense.
Being the first female Black and South Asian vice president, it's a powerful message of representation and inclusion.
Yeah, it really resonates with a lot of voters.
It's not just about policy. It's about showing people that someone who looks like them, someone who understands their struggles, can reach the highest office.
It's about making history, but also about connecting with voters on a deeper level, like saying, I see you, I hear you.
Exactly. Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Trump, his 2016 campaign was...
Unconventional, to say the least.
You can say that again?
Yeah.
But it worked. What's he doing this time around?
Well, he's sticking with what he knows. That potent mix of online engagement and those massive rallies.
Oh, those rallies.
Legendary.
He's a master of social media. Bypasses traditional media, goes straight to his supporters. It's like a direct line to their living rooms. Unfiltered and unapologetic.
And those rallies, they create an energy, a sense of community that's hard to match.
It's about emotion. It's about belonging. It's about framing himself as the outsider fighting against the system.
A powerful narrative, especially now when so many people feel like politics has failed them. But let's be realistic. No campaign is perfect.
Nope.
What are some of the challenges they're up against?
For Harris, one big hurdle is being seen as too tied to President Biden's administration.
The classic VP problem.
Stepping out of the shadow. Creating her own identity.
To show voters she's not just more of the same.
Exactly. She needs to be a leader with her own vision, her own style. And she's got to walk this tightrope appealing to both progressives and moderates within her own party.
Can't alienate the base, but also can't scare off those swing voters.
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What about Trump? What challenges is he facing?
Well, there's the legal stuff.
Oh, yeah.
All those investigations, potential lawsuits.
They could really become major distractions.
Mm.
Take the focus away from his message and make people question his character.
It's hard to stay focused on the issues when you're constantly having to defend yourself. And I know there are concerns within the Republican Party about whether he can actually win.
Electability is a big question mark.
They remember 2020.
They do.
He lost the popular vote, barely won some key states. There's a worry he might alienate those moderate voters.
Especially suburban women.
Right, they were crucial in his loss last time. And then there's the age thing. If he wins, he'd be the oldest president ever.
Definitely raises questions about his health and stamina.
It's a demanding job. Voters want to know if he can handle it. So two candidates facing some serious hurdles. But there's another layer to all this that Wild Wolf 3310 really made me think about. The global impact.
This isn't just about America. It's about America's place in the world.
And with their completely opposite views on things like climate change and foreign policy, the stakes are even higher.
Absolutely. We talked about their different approaches to climate change.
Right. Harris pushing for green energy, rejoining international agreements. Trump going for American energy independence and questioning how urgent climate change really is.
It has huge implications.
Yeah.
Think about it. If Harris wins and really goes for those climate goals, it could have a ripple effect globally. Yeah. Encourage other countries to do more. Breathe new life into those international agreements.
But if Trump wins, goes back to America first, focuses on fossil fuels, downplays global cooperation.
It could be a step back for global climate action.
Yeah.
Other countries might be less likely to make those tough choices on emissions if the U.S., a major polluter, isn't fully on board.
It could weaken international agreements and slow down progress on climate change.
Exactly. This election isn't just about what happens here. It could shape global climate policy for years to come.
Huge implications. And it's not just climate change. It's foreign policy, too. Harris is more into working with allies diplomacy, tackling global issues together.
More of a multilateral approach.
Right. Trump is more unilateral. America first, questions the value of alliances, puts American interests first no matter what.
So depending on who wins, we could see very different approaches to trade military intervention relations with allies and enemies.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this election so fascinating.
It's not just about personalities or even policies. It's about choosing the path America takes.
Both at home and on the world stage.
It's about what kind of country we want to be and what role we want to play in shaping the future. Wild Wolf 3310 was right. The stakes couldn't be higher.
And it all comes down to us.
Us.
The voters. We decide.
Whoa, okay. That's a lot to process. This deep dive has been intense. This election is about so much more than just Democrat versus Republican.
Way more. It's about competing visions for America's future.
And maybe even the world's future. And as Wild Wolf 3310 said, voting is how we shape that future.
Every vote counts.
But there's one thing Wild Wolf 3310 didn't really talk about that I think is super relevant here, especially with how different their views are on everything from the economy to social issues. With their views being so different, I'm thinking about what this election means for the Supreme Court.
Oh, that's huge. The next president could easily appoint multiple justices to the court.
It's a lifetime appointment.
Exactly. A huge impact on law and society for generations.
It's easy to overlook the long-term stuff like that.
Think about it. Abortion rights, gun control, climate regulations, the balance of power between the federal government and states. It could all be reshaped by the court.
And the court's already pretty divided. Ideologically, I mean, any new appointments could totally shift the balance.
I'm sure. And with those issues being so important to people, the Supreme Court will definitely be a focus this election.
It's like we're voting not just for president, but for the future of the court, too.
That's a great way to put it. It shows how much is at stake in this election. It's not just about the next 4 years. It's about the direction of the country for decades.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. It's amazing how much one election can affect.
It really is.
Yeah.
It shows how powerful democracy is and how important it is to be informed and engaged.
For sure. We've got to do our research, understand the issues, and choose the leader who we think is best for the future.
Big responsibility.
Oh, no pressure.
Right? It is a big responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also an amazing privilege to be a part of this, to have a say in shaping our nation's future.
All right, everyone. That's it for our deep dive into the 2024 U.S. presidential election complex. Fascinating, and something we all need to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, and remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, vote.